It is an honor to participate in this event and to say a few words. I thank SAIIA for the privilege of being here tonight, and also for the privilege of playing a small role in this important book by writing the foreword. As you know, the book they are launching today is African Accountability, What Works and What Doesn't. Congratulations to the editors, Stephen Roots and Yang Turiansky, and to the contributors of the chapters in the book. SAIIA also deserves our applause for supporting and sponsoring this project. Accountability is the lifeblood of entrusted power, and we all know that at the core of democracy is entrusted power. As villages, as countries, as the world, we put our trust in a handful among us because we trust them more than we trust ourselves. We can't all manage our affairs, so we ask a few among us, those that we trust, with the hope that they will manage our affairs and our resources honestly and in our interests. That is why, therefore, I say accountability is the lifeblood of entrusted power, because as you look after somebody's affairs or resources, the only way they can rely on you is through some form of accountability. When you look at the book, you will agree with me, thank you, you will agree with me that the timing of the book couldn't be better. At the level of the continent just adopted 2 years ago Agenda 2063, which is aiming to take the continent to the next 50 years of Africa rising, with the idea that by the time African democracies reach 100 years, starting with the first democracy, of course, being Ghana in 1963, Africa will be truly liberated, not just by replacing African politicians with the colonial politicians, but liberated in a sense that every person's potential will be freed, everybody's life will be improved, and Africa will be governed in terms of true democracy and the rule of law. So that's the vision that the AU has for this continent, which builds on the vision that Kwame Nkrumah and his contemporaries had for this continent when they wrestled it from the colonialists. At the core, of course, of that vision is a continent that continues to grow in terms of the economy and science, education, and all areas of life, with all citizens of the continent playing a role in its growth and benefiting equitably from the growth of the continent. Africa is also on the verge of finalizing its program on what it refers to as silencing of the guns in Africa by 2020, which is 5 years from now. And of course, at the core of silencing the guns is finding a way to dialogue meaningfully and bring everyone to a meaningful dialogue about how countries are governed and how the continent is governed. I do believe that the timing of the book will bring some impetus to that dialogue around silencing of the guns in terms of the themes that are being debated in the book around what we're doing right and where we are falling short of our own dreams and aspirations. But when we look back today as Africans, we see undoubtable strides in Africa rising. I'm not an economist, but I'm told that the GDP, the average GDP growth in the continent is at about 9% if you take the continent as a whole. We're seeing Africa participating in science and technology. Many young people, our millennials as we refer to them, winning serious prizes on innovation, science and technology. In South Africa we have the SAIIA project, which is of course part of science, technology and development in the continent. There's been hope-inspiring developments such as the APRM that we've been reminded about, instruments such as the various African charters. Key among those charters and relevant to our conversation tonight is the Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. All of those have been good signs as part of Africa Rising. But you'll agree with me that much as Africa is rising, much as there is a lot to hope for, there's been worrying developments. Mo Ibrahim Index on Governance was issued recently, and it indicated that the standards of governance and democracy are declining in many of our African countries. So on the one hand, we have all of these big promises about Agenda 2063, meaning we should be getting better and better every day in the area of governance and democracy. And we have silencing of the guns in Africa. If you read the book and you look at the Mo Ibrahim Index, you will see that there are some worrying trends that contradict the vision we have and the hopes we have. We have institutions of democracy that are not functioning according to design simply because they may be under-resourced or undermined. We have elections in the continent that continue to be in jeopardy because there are worries about whether those elections were rigged or not. Incidentally, even in our country, there is one election that is currently, local government election, that is currently under doubt. We have wars. We have a resurgence of wars. We have terrorism. We have children being abducted and turned into soldiers, girls being turned into wives or sold into slavery. There's terrorism, there's counter-terrorism here in Africa and all over the world. If somebody visited planet Earth today, they may be forgiven for concluding that we're in the middle of a third world war, just given the extent of conflict, the extent of armed conflict that is taking place on the continent. But all of this is happening in our continent and in the world, despite all of these instruments of hope. How about closer home here in South Africa? What is the state of accountability in governance? Again, I think you'll agree with me, as the authors of the book will agree with me, that today is better than yesterday. As we celebrate 21 years of democracy, we are grateful for breaking with apartheid and colonialism and undertaking this journey towards constitutional democracy. But are we moving at the right pace? Again, I think you'll agree with me that there are worrying developments. As we celebrate 21 years of democracy, there's turbulence in our backyard. The Fees Must Fall movement that was mentioned earlier is just but one of examples of turbulence. Various things are being asked to fall. Even without the hashtag, things are being made to fall. As we speak today, I was supposed to have gone to Northwest. I couldn't go because of this and other engagements today. The reason we're to go there is because a village is in trouble. A sleepy village in Northwest is finding itself in a situation where villagers have decided to stop children from going to school. They've banned 2 schools, they've banned a clinic. All in the name of service failure or service delivery failure. But you have to ask yourself, is it really service failure that caused the banning of the school? And that's where I think this book might offer us some insights around democracy, the promise, the expectations versus reality. As I indicated, democracy is about entrusted power, and the lifeblood of democracy is accountability. We have an excellent constitution with excellent pillars. Why do we have a situation such as the village in Northwest where people are banning things instead of talking? Perhaps a short story I will give you might provide you some insights. Yesterday, my team sent me a response from a suspended official from one of our government institutions. So I won't say whether it's national, provincial, or local government. They just sent me a response, a text response from a person. We had advised this official that we intend to subpoena him to appear before our office because he was involved in a controversial tender, so we would like to ask him some questions. He writes to us, pleading with us to understand his situation. He says that he is in favor of constitutionalism and he respects our office. However, he has a problem, he has a dilemma. His dilemma is the fact that he has been suspended from his position precisely because of the tender we're investigating. Because in his view, he was standing in the way of what other people were asking. He then says he has a difficulty because the conditions of his suspension is that he should not talk about anything involving his institution. If he comes to us, he would be talking about matters involving his institution, and he would be precisely talking about the very matter that has caused him to be outside the system. He tells us that for many months his salary was suspended, and it took a court of law to reinstate that salary. He's now worried, though, that if he comes, that salary will be suspended again. And he has put his family through turbulence, and he doesn't think his family would survive further turbulence. Now, why would this situation arise? Is it an aberration? I wish I could say it's an aberration, that we've never heard stories like this before. Sadly, we hear such stories from whistleblowers many times. Is this happening because there's lack of legislation? Or we don't have continental instruments that are binding on South Africa? No, we do have the instrument on the Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, which among other among other things, commits to institution building and to supporting institutions such as the Public Protector as part of a strong democracy in Africa, strong accountable democracy. Is it lack of proper provisions in the Constitution? Certainly no. The Public Protector is a Chapter 9 institution with clear constitutional provisions allowing it to investigate any suspected or alleged improper conduct in state affairs within any part of state affairs, to report on that conduct and to take appropriate remedial action. Is it a legislative gap? Certainly no. There's plenty of legislation allowing this institution to hold people accountable, and one of those instruments is the Public Protector Act. Section 7.4 of the Public Protector Act empowers this institution to call anyone in the country to provide information. What is the problem? It's really the gap between the commitment and what we do on a day-to-day basis, which is one of those things that the authors of the book talk about. The authors of the book say something very unique about the fact that African leaders came into power and somehow found themselves emulating their predecessors. I would like to ask you a question tonight about, is it possible in South Africa that unintentionally, despite a different vision, we are emulating our predecessors? Is it possible that some of the debates in Parliament, which Parliament should be based on constitutional democracy, are more suited for debates in a Parliament where Parliament is supreme? And people are not aware of that because we've just stepped into the shoes of those we found unintentionally. Is that a possibility? But it is also a possibility, as my deputy often says, that some of the tendencies that we ourselves acquired as part of the measures to dismantle apartheid are tendencies that we continue to use when we are not supposed to be dismantling anything but building. All I can say is that today is better than yesterday on many fronts, but there are troubling developments. You do know that apart from these issues of accountability, apart from the issues of governance, we do have growing social problems such as corruption. We inherited a state where there was corruption, but we chose this system because it was supposed to be better than the one we found. In other words, corruption should be declining instead of increasing. Social injustice, specifically inequality, has grown. We have become one of the most unequal societies in the world. This is despite the fact that Section 1 of the Constitution commits us to the achievement of equality. Section 9 of the Constitution commits us to non-discrimination and the adoption of measures to achieve equality. But social injustice continues to be one of our problems. And interestingly, 15 years into the passing of the Equality Act, Chapter 5 of that Act remains not implemented. We can't blame apartheid for not implementing a law that we passed and the law that we knew we needed. So it's some of those growing tendencies among ourselves. And where did they come from? Some of it is inexperience. When we dreamt about governing, we had never governed. So obviously, doing is slightly more different than planning or dreaming. Corruption has undermined some of the things that we're trying to achieve. And linked to corruption is maladministration, or bad administration, if you may put so. where we agree to do one thing when the rules send us in one direction, and we often end up in a different way. Going back to the village I spoke to you about, it would be interesting to find out, what did the IDP say? Did the IDP provide for roads? Did the IDP provide for water? Did the IDP provide for electricity? And if it did, what happened? If it didn't, why didn't it do so? Because we knew that we needed to provide those things, for those things. Lastly, on the issue of accountability is the issue of impunity, both at national and in the continent. We do know that when there's impunity, it is difficult to arrest people because others are watching, and if they realize that nothing is going to happen to me, there's more people who are willing to engage in wrongdoing. They just have to find out from those who are enjoying impunity, what is the formula. If the formula is you buy your way out, they'll buy their way out. If the formula is you get friends in good places, if the formula is you keep sound relationships with important people, they will do so. But then you have a growing number of people that enjoy impunity, and before we know, impunity is a systemic. Again, I'm not saying these are exactly the reasons we're having the challenges. I'm more just throwing these questions to you, to saying, let's look at this book. Let's give some of these issues our own thoughts. And let's reflect on where we are 21 years into democracy, 2 years into the implementation of Agenda 2063, and say, what have we done right? Where have we messed up? And how do we take the process forward? The reality is, we all occupy a troubled world. Our country is in trouble, the continent is in trouble, and the world is generally in trouble, particularly on the issue of social justice, conflict, and issues of corruption and the rule of law. It seems to me, though, that we can't look to government and governments for the answer. We all have to play a role in finding those answers. And it's not just about some of us talking about what needs to be done. We all have to do something. We all have to stop doing certain things. We all have to start doing certain things. For example, I was speaking about business. It's not enough for business to say we're not going to end social justice because Chapter 5 of the Equality Act has not been implemented. Business on its own can do an equality analysis in its company and in the communities around it and start playing some role in ending social injustice. It's also not enough for business to cheat communities when it comes to those social compacts for mining and say simply because there's regulatory failure, we are going to cheat. Good companies don't cheat because they know that cheating people is not sustainable. If you want peace, you have to work for social justice, because there can't be peace anywhere as long as there is some injustice. So domestically and internationally, I think we need a book like this. It speaks about Africa, but I suspect that it speaks to the world about walking the talk as people, as governments, strengthening accountability and strengthening, and in the process, ending impunity. I thank SAIIA for the project. I thank the authors and the editors for their foresight and the work they've done. I invite all of us here and others to look into this book, think about these issues, and continue the conversation on accountability, governance, democracy,